Vincent, hello. Good afternoon. Lovely to see you.
Good afternoon to you, Ephraim.
Justin.
Good afternoon.
In a bit of a different way from usual.
Yes, absolutely. I'm Vincent. It's lovely to see you.
Okay, thank you so much for both of you for joining us. It's a very special occasion in the midst of extraordinary times. And for us within the Jewish faith, as I'm sure it is for you, the absence of the house of prayer as being right at the center of our life of faith presents for us a fresh challenge, because we now really need to reconfigure the definition of community and primarily to guarantee that the adherents to our faith appreciate the fact that every single one of our homes needs now to be primarily a house of God, and our faith is so crucially important to us all. And I'm finding myself personally, as I hope many others right now are finding, that God sustains us through the most difficult and challenging of times.
If I may, I would just like to say, Ephraim, I couldn't have put it more beautifully. And that notion that with churches closed, that the rootedness of faith now lies much more within each one of us and within our family circle or the people with whom we are, as it were, shut in. That is so, so true. And my sense is that it's teaching us those deeper roots of our relationship with God. It's teaching us deeper roots of personal prayer. It's teaching us that while we might not be physically in touch with each other, there is a great bond of fellowship and of the Holy Spirit. And there's something actually quite positive, even just beginning to emerge, I think, in this experience, painful as it is.
And I agree with that very much. And I agree, too, that Ephraim put it particularly beautifully. One of the things we've been discussing here is, and with amongst the bishops, is how much we have to learn from the Jewish community, for whom, for instance, the meal at the beginning of the Sabbath is an absolutely critical bit of liturgy of the life of prayer. But that is held in the home and often led, usually in my experience, led by the mother taking a very important role, or the children taking a very important role. There's an all-age element to it. And of course, in the early Christian era, church was in someone's home. And then as buildings got grander and more significant, in the end, we came to today's strange place where the building is seen as the church and the people, those who go to the church. And I think what we will be learning from this is to recover the idea that the church is the people of God, regardless of whether they have a building, beautiful and wonderful as those buildings are.
What we're finding is that those who are praying now are praying for prayer's sake. Usually when people come to a house of God, it could be out of habit. It could be to do the right thing, to be loyal, for the social dimension. For us, it's the Kiddush, that's the tea afterwards. But in the private confines of one's home, when one prays now, it is genuine, deep-rooted prayer. And those of us who are privileged to be able to pray in this way are finding that Almighty God is with us all the way. And it is a very powerful and empowering element of our existence right now.
Yes, and what strikes me is that there is so much help emerging, especially on the internet, to help us all to keep on track, as it were. I'm amazed at the creativity of so many groups and individuals who there's a kind of burgeoning of spirituality, a burgeoning a way of helping each other to pray. And, we are hugely benefiting from these remarkable internet facilities. It's the house church of the early church combined with the technology of the 21st century. And for once, the technology looks unambiguously positive just in this period. And I'm just astonished at the creativity and the richness and the inventiveness of so many things that are on offer to help us.
And Vincent, you're absolutely right in terms of the help that people are giving. And what I find to be so inspiring now is the extent to which people see the selflessness that is so important now as being an integral part of our religious identity. And this is religion in its finest hour, when people are there for the sake of others. And it's something quite extraordinary and inspirational. And we've seen the whole national effort as being something wonderful. Britain is a remarkable country. We're privileged to be part of a great society. The response to the call for volunteering, which I think now is up to something like 750,000 people to come out and to help, is simply extraordinary. And we're finding in our community similarly that people are going beyond the call of duty to be there for the sake of others.
I entirely agree. I think that there is so much good news amidst the darkness at the moment. And I think there is so much to celebrate. People are wanting to be in touch with each other and most of all to be in touch with God. And also we're finding around the communion, the Anglican communion, all 165 countries, that sense of community in a way that perhaps we've been missing for a very, very long time, if we've ever had it before. And that's thanks to social.
Yeah, I'll tell you something else which I find very encouraging. As a truism in life, we appreciate things most when we don't have them, or at the very least when there's a threat to their existence. And when there was a threat to public prayer, to our houses of God being opened, the members of our communities said, keep them open. They didn't want to have an easy life. On the contrary, they were demanding, they wanted it open. Obviously, at the end of the day, for the sake of preserving life, they were with us in the importance of closing them, because we do have a responsibility right now to ourselves and to our society in this very difficult time. But people were calling on us, keep the houses of prayer open. And it just shows how deep-rooted faith is and how important our connection to our faith roots is.
Do you know, I don't think we should underestimate how difficult this is for many people. And I'm here in Archbishop's house, and we've got plenty of room. Many families are in very, very constrained spaces. And I'm sure I struggle to find a way in which to say to them who might not have a practice of faith, there is something to learn. There is something to learn from us. And the thing that I find myself repeating is this: do give your day a routine, give it a structure. Stick to that structure that you agree. But within that structure, give yourself a time of profound silence, because that silence is the doorway through which they might go tiptoe into a sense of God's presence, and therefore into an expression of prayer. And for those who are not used to silence, for those we're not used to silence and we're not used to being closed in together. But the whole of our religious traditions tell us that when you're in together, chosen isolation in monasteries and things, a routine is vital and times of silence are vital. And I just hope anyone listening to this would pick that up and not be afraid to sit quietly together and let God do the rest.
I entirely agree.
And you were right, Vincent, that we're living through momentous times. It's not that often that you actually feel, right now, I'm living through a moment which throughout the future people will look back on as being a momentous turning point. Ever since 1945, we've been living in the post-war era, and I believe that from 2020 onwards, we'll be living in the post-virus era. And people will be looking back to this time that we are living through right now. And certainly for me, together with so many considerations, as we were mentioning before, the loving kindness of people, the volunteering spirit, the responsibility is certainly coming through. The primary role that the sacred nature of life has is of critical importance. And in addition to all of that, the fact that God sustains. He is with us in this very challenging time. I feel it personally at a time when, together with yourselves, I have a responsibility to make some very important decisions. It's not often that a decision that one makes as a leader makes a difference to life or death, but that's actually what we are doing right now in terms of our policies with regard to what remains open, what will be closed, and so on. And I feel the presence of the Almighty with you, as with me. I feel the presence of the Almighty with me, as I'm sure the two of you do right now.
We do. I do. Though I must admit, sometimes I struggle with people's question is, where is God in all of this? Why is God letting this happen? And it does strike me there are two very important lessons. One is this is an event of the natural order. And what it poses to us is not a question of how did this come about. Science tells us that now. But it poses the question of what should change in my way of life? What am I being challenged to look at afresh? And I think we have a lot of discerning to do between what has seemed to be the key aims in life and what now this time reveals to be the really important things in life. And this is a summons to us, to all of us, to live more closely to the crucial things and not worry too much about the superficial things. And I think for all three of us and for me who want to proclaim my belief in God, that problem we have to not be afraid of saying, this is a challenge from God. It's a challenge that has arisen out of the events of the world. Science helps us to solve them, but science alone won't do it, and nor is our faith opposed to that science. I can't say, I believe in God, therefore I'll ignore the evidence. No, it's science, reason, and faith working together in a very important way.
I think one of the key challenges for many people, thinking about what you said, Vincent, earlier about space and being confined, is that when we are confined, when we're closed in some way, the most difficult person we meet is ourselves. You know? And even if we're confined with a number of other people, we find things within us that we really don't like, are ashamed of, try and cover up with anger and all kinds of things. I think we've seen already a very significant increase in domestic violence over the last couple of weeks. And I do think we do have the questions, but we also need to recognize that in many people, there is a very, very deep anxiety, which is sometimes behind the question, where is God in this? Because unsaid is, where is God in this for me? And I think one of the things I'm very struck by is the need to remind, or at this time of year, particularly in the run-up to Holy Week and Easter in the Christian calendar and Passover in the Jewish calendar, is the reminder that God did not abandon his people. He was part of what was happening. He led them through the deepest, most painful business. I expect there were many Israelites at the time of the plagues who were thinking, I don't know what's got into the weather nowadays. You know, if they hadn't been talking to Moses and were deeply confused by what was happening, and yet God was at work. Sometimes we only see God in retrospect more easily than at the time. But so the key thing for me is to speak of forgiveness. That whatever we find when we're confined, whatever we find when we know God has been with us, his presence has been with us, and we've turned away and expressed anger or been doing wrong in one way or another, we need to learn to receive the forgiveness of God and the forgiveness of one another and to offer it to one another. And I think that's something our society has forgotten how to do and is absolutely essential.
A verse which comes to my mind often these days is Proverbs 19:21. Many are the intentions of people, but it is the will of the Lord which shall prevail. And, you know, every single one of us, if we look at our diaries, what were our intentions? What were our plans? All gone awry. It's the will of God which prevails. We can't get right down to the depths of it. Why is this happening? And sure enough, this is a natural phenomenon. But there is something that we can see in recent developments. I described 2019 as the year of the unpredictable. We were going through that extraordinary phase of Brexit, or not yet Brexit, where literally from day to day, history was being made. The rule books were being torn up. You didn't know what the next hour was going to bring. And what's happening now has just outclassed that totally. 2020 is far more a year of the unpredictable. And it just shows the extent to which actually, as smart as we think we are, we're really not in control. And we look to the Almighty for our guidance. But at the same time, the Almighty is also looking to us. In our Jewish tradition, we have the concepts of bitachon and hishtadlut. Bitachon is my implicit and deep-rooted faith in God. Hishtadlut is what I need to do, my responsibility as a partner of the Almighty. And while God is sustaining us right now, he's looking to us to be responsible with regard to our own health and our responsibility to those around us.
Yeah,
I think that's right. I'm particularly conscious, as we all would be, where we have friends working in the NHS or in shops that have remained open, deliveries, where they're in the emergency services, where they're meeting people the whole time, that it is God's will that prevails, but their contribution is to offer their lives and their service and their health to ensure that others live and are secure. And it's sometimes very obscure people, unknown people who do that, people we'd never think of. But for them, we need to be praying and giving thanks as well, but praying for their protection as well, because they're the ones who are doing what God calls them to do, even if they may not be thinking that way.
Absolutely.
There is, for me, an image which keeps going through my mind. And it comes from the history of the people of Israel and that journey through the desert, which is so much a kind of parable of the life of every one of us. And that time of great thirst, and Moses striking the rock, and from it pouring the water that quenched the thirst of all the people and their sheep and cattle as well. And we're in a rocky place. We really are. And this gift of faith enables us to know that God strikes those rocks. In our faith, it's the cross of Jesus that strikes the rock of the tomb and breaks it open. And we see this rock face being broken open by so many good people, as Justin says. And that's the work of God. And it will flow and become a torrent for us on which to quench our anxieties and our thirst.
As we're approaching now the Passover, this is going to be an enormous challenge for us, because there is no other family-orientated calendar event like the Passover for us. And the fact that we're going to be separated in different homes over the festive period is going to make it very difficult, in particular for the elderly and those who are self-isolated by themselves. I wonder what it's like for yourselves leading up to Easter and the challenges that presents. And I know that our Muslim friends are coming up now to Ramadan, and that is going to be exceptionally challenging for them. And what we're finding now is that connections with people, acts of loving kindness, assistance that people are giving, and using modern technology to be in touch are assisting enormously. And in addition to that, to have faith in God, who delivered us as the Israelites from Egypt in our history, and who has sustained us through the most horrific events in our past. And we look to him to sustain us now.
Hallelujah. Indeed. Indeed. And yes, you're right. And I think we beautifully look to exactly the same things. We look to the bonds between people sustained, helped by the internet. We look to those bonds of prayer, and we will have our online gathering points around the great ceremonies of the Easter festival. They'll all be rather modest. They'll all be stripped of their richness, but their essence, I think, will still shine through very brightly.
And again, in our within Christian understanding, of course, the first Easter was the first witnesses were some completely unknown women. And so it wasn't a grand thing. It wasn't huge. It's an extraordinary thing in the same way as presumably the initial Passover was a lot of people eating a meal quite quickly, ready to leave, and then shuffling out into the desert full of apprehension, I would guess, for many of them, while chaos reigned around them. And sometimes these moments of intense difficulty take us back to the heart of the reality of God's presence, as opposed to the veneer that we can quite easily put over it.
Yes. We might just finish by reciting a verse or two of The Lord's My Shepherd.
Okay.
Any version you like.
It'll be the Welby version. My memory fails me. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. By still waters, he feeds me.
Gam ki elech begeitz al mavet, lo ira ra ki ata imati, shivtecha umish'antecha, hema yenachamuni.
Even though I walk in the shadow of darkness, no evil shall I fear. For you are there with your crook and your staff. With these you give me comfort. Amen.
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 Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed.
I really enjoyed that. We should do it more often, but that's
it was wonderful.
Yeah, there we are. We can do it next week if you like, for a bit of just for a chat.
Oh, thank you so much. I derived a lot of encouragement from that. It's a privilege to engage with the two of you in this way. Thank you.
And with you. And with you. And with you, Justin. Thank you.
And Vincent.
Stay safe.
God bless you.
Thank you.